flicker of candlelight did little to pierce the oppressive darkness that had settled over my home. Shadows crept along the walls, warped into twisted, unnatural shapes that set my nerves on edge. I clutched the ancient text closer, squinting at the faded pages barely illuminated by the struggling candle flame. My rusty grasp of Aramaic made it slow going, but I could make out enough. Lamashtu. The name seemed to crawl from the crumbling pages in a rasping whisper that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. From what I could gather, Lamashtu was a demon, a goddess, some sinister hybrid of both conceived in ancient Mesopotamian myths. She was revered and feared in equal measure by those who whispered her name, spreading her legends in fearful tones. They called her the Ripper-Up, a relisher of suffering and death who preyed on pregnant women and snatched babies from their cribs, leaving only bloodied remains behind. Some myths claimed she was the mother of monsters, evil beasts and demons that plagued mankind. Others painted her as a malevolent goddess, daughter of the heavens themselves, keeper of dark secrets never meant to be unearthed. In all the tales, she was described as a twisted, paranormal entity who despised humanity and brought woe upon them. Her presence signaled calamity and darkness. Villages that earned her ire were said to have their livestock and crops suddenly stricken with disease. Infants would sicken and cry endlessly as she tormented them mercilessly. She could infect the minds of men with violent madness, driving them to horrific acts against their loved ones. Just reading these passages filled me with dread at the prospect of such a creature being real. The flickering shadows and oppressive gloom weighing down the atmosphere of my home already felt like an ill omen. An oppressive presence permeated my home, seeping into every room like a malignant fog. In the shadows, a visage seemed to form and fade, distorted features emerging from the darkness, a twisted face with sunken eyes and distended jaws. It solidified only for a moment before fading back into the obscure shapes cast by furniture and walls. But that moment imprinted itself on my mind, the stuff of nightmares given substance. My daughter's shrill cries startled me from my fearful reverie. Heart thudding against my ribs, I rushed to her room, nearly stumbling in my haste. Her wailing echoed through the hallway, amplified by the unnatural stillness that had settled over the house. I swept her from her crib into my trembling arms, her tear-slicked face burying into my shoulder. She thrashed and kicked as I whispered soothing words into her ear. Slowly, her cries quieted to hiccups and soft whimpers, but her small body still quaked with lingering distress. As her breathing steadied, I scanned the room, eyes darting to every corner. A chill crawled up my spine despite the numerous blankets tucked around my daughter. The very air felt heavier, weighted down by some malignant presence. In the far corner, the shadows seemed to twist and writhe with a life of their own, forming grasping tendrils that pulled back each time I tried to focus on them. Clutching my daughter close, I fled the room on quaking legs. But the feeling of being watched clung to my back, following me down the hallway into the supposed safety of light. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel. The highway stretched on before me, dark and desolate. Streetlights flashed by in a hypnotic rhythm. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to the horrors waiting at home. Beside me, my daughter slept, blissfully oblivious. I envied that innocence. The pediatrician had said she was fine, meeting every milestone. Still, I worried. She had always been sensitive, prone to sleep disturbances most would dismiss as night terrors. But now her mood seemed to shift without warning, bright laughter giving way to shrieking rage. Her chronic nightmares worried me most. Violent thrashing, accompanied by blood-curdling screams. When I met Dr. Matthews, I was desperate for answers. His kind eyes and patient demeanor put me at ease right away. He called himself a parapsychologist, attempting to merge science and the psychic realms. I might have scoffed at that notion before, but now I was desperate for answers. I told him everything. The oppressive presence permeating our home, the strange shadows, my daughter's behavior, and chronic nightmares. He listened intently, brow furrowed in concern as he took careful notes in a leather journal. When I finally finished, he let out a long breath. "I have some theories," he said slowly, "but my advice would be to avoid mentioning certain names again." He gave me a meaningful look. Names can have great power. For now, take these. He handed me a small drawstring pouch emitting a faint, earthy scent. Protective herbs, he explained. Keep them close to your daughter, under her pillow, perhaps. I clutched the pouch like a talisman, overwhelmed with gratitude. As I turned to leave, one question still lingered. Do you believe me, Dr. Matthews? He met my gaze with a solemnity that chilled me to my core. I have seen true evil in this world, Mrs. Carter, and I fear yours has only just begun. Dread settled like a heavy stone in the pit of my stomach as I drove home. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. Inside, the house felt several degrees colder, as if a chill had settled into its very bones. I placed the small pouch of herbs under my daughter's pillow as she slept fitfully, whimpering and twitching beneath her blankets. Dark half-moons hung below her eyes, evidence of her disturbed sleep plagued by vivid nightmares. I sat vigil in the old rocking chair beside her bed throughout the night, warding away the darkness pressing in. Every creak of the floorboards set my nerves on edge. Despite Dr. Matthews' assurances and protective charms, the malicious activity only grew more sinister over the next several days. My daughter's night terrors increased in frequency and violence, her piercing screams echoing through the house each night. I would rush to her room to find her sheets soaked in sweat, eyes rolling wildly in her head as if trying to escape some unseen horror. Mysterious symbols began appearing on the walls, as though scrawled by an unseen hand. Jagged letters and strange pictograms in some long-dead language. I would scrub at them desperately, only to have new ones manifest by morning. Most chilling of all were the faint whispers that permeated the darkness. No matter which room I stood in, I could hear them. A rasping female voice uttering sibilant words in a language I strained to understand. Though soft as a breath, they raised the hairs on my neck and sent ice water down my spine. When I asked my daughter if she heard them, she just stared at me blankly. Whether she was hiding the truth or truly oblivious, I did not know. I could feel malevolent forces gathering strength within the walls of our home. Something ancient and evil had turned its gaze upon my daughter, and the powerless feeling threatened to consume me. My breaking point came late one restless night the following week. Sleep continued to evade me, my mind plagued by disturbing visions whenever I closed my eyes. I lay staring up at the ceiling fan as it cast swirling shadows across the room in an endless loop. A creak from somewhere within the bowels of the house jerked me alert. I crept to the top of the stairs, ears straining into the darkness. Another creak, followed by a faint scuffling. The hairs on my arms stood at attention. Something had drawn me from my bed and lured me to the basement door left inexplicably ajar. Cold, damp air seeped up the narrow wooden stairs as I descended slowly, each creak of old wood sending chills skittering down my spine. I swept my flashlight beam over the clammy concrete floor strewn with dust and debris. Cobwebs danced in the narrow beam, which illuminated little beyond my immediate surroundings. The stale darkness pressed down like a smothering blanket. From the farthest shadowy corner came a small scuffling noise, followed by faint whimpers. Gripping the flashlight like a talisman, I took tentative steps forward. The small cone of light at last fell upon a huddled shape, and my heart nearly stopped. "Sweetie!" My voice cracked. She did not look up, eyes downcast, slowly rocking back and forth. Dark smears marred her pale nightgown and tiny hands. As I ran to embrace her, the beam illuminated a disturbing sight on the floor where she sat. Etched crudely into the concrete was an intricate symbol, rings within rings marked with arcane shapes and unfamiliar sigils. Protective warding, a small, desperate hope flickered in my mind. But how had she gotten down here alone? And what new terror had she faced that led her to create such bizarre markings? I swept my daughter into my trembling arms and quickly ascended the stairs, eager to escape the oppressive basement. But new questions swirled feverishly as I tried in vain to soothe her soft whimpers. That night, as I lay rigid with fear, the nightmares came for me instead. Twisted visions swirled through my mind. flashes of malevolent eyes and skittering beasts. A rasping female voice taunted me, uttering threats drowned out by my daughter's screams. Shadowy hands dragged her into the darkness, just out of reach. I woke in a cold sweat, pulse racing. Pressing my hands over my eyes, I struggled to control my breathing. It was just a dream, I told myself. But my legs carried me swiftly to my daughter's room just to be sure. Relief crashed over me at the sight of her curled up asleep, stuffed hippo tucked under her arm. As I sagged against the doorframe, the shrill ring of my cell phone made me jump. Dr. Matthews. Why was he calling so early? Hello. My voice was hoarse, still choked with sleep. Mrs. Carter. His usual calming timbre was missing. I'm sorry to call at this hour. I wanted to check on you. A knot formed in my gut. Is something wrong? A heavy silence. Have you been engaging in any rituals lately? The question blindsided me. What? No, of course not. Are you certain? No incantations? Hexes? Anything? His voice took on a grave urgency. My hands started to shake. Dr. Matthews, I swear I don't know what you mean. Because there has been a distinct darkening of energies focused on your home. Events may begin escalating rapidly. His ominous words turned my blood to ice. Escalating how? My voice quavered, betraying the dread coursing through me. In times of great stress, she grows stronger, feeds on fear. The entity will do anything to gain a foothold in this world. His voice took on a grave urgency. Stay vigilant. Trust no one. I'm coming by this afternoon to check the wardings. The line went dead, his ominous final words ringing in my ears. She. Lamashtu-a. Revulsion washed over me, uttering that foul name. This living nightmare had gone too far. I had to take action, to end it. I rifled desperately through the kitchen drawers with trembling hands until I found a paring knife. Gripping the wooden handle tightly, I dragged the blade across my upturned palm without hesitation. Blood welled up, crimson against my pale skin. Kneeling on the hardwood floor, I let the vital fluid drip steadily, using it to paint the familiar swirling lines of an ancient warding. Each curve and sigil felt charged with power that seemed to thrum through my veins in time with my racing heart. Lamashtu! I shouted recklessly into the empty room, my voice echoing back at me. I banish you from this place. The silence swelled, oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting. The fine hairs on the back of my neck stood rigid. Then, a bone-chilling laugh reverberated through the room, raising goosebumps along my arms. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Oh, my pet. A voice like splintering bone whispered right next to my ear, freezing me in place. We have only just begun. I leapt back, scanning the room wildly, but only empty space and shadows surrounded me. My warding still glistened wetly on the floor. Whether it would be enough to turn away the sinister forces gathering around us, I did not know. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Dr. Matthews' grave warnings echoed in my mind. It was clear now that he had been right. Lamashtu was escalating her attacks, toying with me like a cat batting at a cornered mouse. The memory of that bone-chilling laugh still rang in my ears, raising goosebumps along my arms. I could feel the sinister presence radiating through the house, seeping into the very walls and floors like a malignant cancer. It left a bitter metallic taste in my mouth and a pressure behind my eyes. The air felt heavier, as if a thunderstorm was brewing despite the cloudless skies outside. My daughter, my precious little girl, had grown worryingly listless under the demon's influence. Her round cheeks were growing gaunt, skin stretched thin and pale over her cheekbones. Faint bruises lined her sunken, dull eyes from endless, restless nights. She hardly touched her meals now, listlessly pushing the food around her plate until it grew cold and congealed into unappetizing lumps. At night, while I lay rigid with fear in my own bed, paralyzed by the twisted visions that plagued my nightmares, she would rise as if in a trance. Her tiny footsteps traced patterns across the ceiling as she wandered the house for hours in the gloom. I would find her curled up on the basement floor each morning, surrounded by her eerie drawings scribbled on dirty sheets of paper. Disturbing images bled from her small hands. Figures contorted in pain, beasts with jagged fangs, eyes scribbled out or dripping blood. During Dr. Matthews' now daily visits, my daughter would sit silent and unmoving, no matter how he tried to interact with her. She seemed almost catatonic, eyes downcast, wholly absorbed in the small object she perpetually twirled in her hands. The carved figurine was grotesque, a distorted jackal's head with rows of finely etched razor-sharp teeth. Looking at it too long stirred primal instinctual fears buried deep in my psyche. "Keep her away from that foul thing," Dr. Matthews said sharply upon noticing it. He rifled through his leather satchel with shaking hands and produced a small flask of water, along with several dried herbs wrapped in parchment. "Blessed water for cleansing and protection," he explained hurriedly. "Use it liberally throughout the house, and burn these herbs: juniper, sage, rosemary. The smoke will help purify the air." I eyed the proffered items dubiously. Protective charms and wardings had proven useless thus far. At this point, "Do you think it might take an exorcism of some kind?" I did not want to voice the word, but Dr. Matthews merely nodded grimly. "I cannot lie to you. That may indeed be the inevitable outcome," he said heavily. "But let us explore every option before resorting to such extreme measures. I will be by again tomorrow, so we can discuss." I mutely showed the doctor out. But as he made his way down the steps, he hesitated and turned back toward me, a question lingering behind his eyes. "You know, some very learned men have theorized that Lamashtu, more than other demonic entities, wanders the earth eternally restless, constantly seeking a living host," he said carefully. "A malevolent spirit in endless search of a vulnerable soul to corrupt fully, to embody completely so she may wreak greater havoc on the mortal plane." His eyes darted briefly to the second-story window, my daughter's darkened room. I felt icy tendrils of dread wrap around my heart, but I kept my voice steady. "Just what exactly are you suggesting, Doctor?" Dr. Matthews held up a hand, a placating gesture. "I only mention it so you may remain fully vigilant, Mrs. Carter. You know the signs of possession better than any layperson I have met. Should things escalate..." He trailed off ominously. Long after the doctor took his leave, a profound unease lingered, and his words plagued me. The mere possibility that something as evil, as ancient and sadistic as Lamashtu had chosen my precious daughter, my innocent lamb, to be the vessel through which she would fully manifest her powers here on Earth... It was a notion so terrible. I could barely stand to dwell on it long enough to even explicate the thought fully in my mind. Yet, I could no longer deny that the signs were all there and escalating rapidly. The trances, the erratic behavior, the unnatural strength. And then, there were the drawings, the symbols, the perverse ravings. God help me. Even now I shudder to recall the things I heard uttered from my daughter's lips in the small hours of night. Words in languages unknown, yet still evoking such vivid visions of chaos and depravity within my mind. No, I could avoid the horrific truth no longer. My little girl, my baby, the sweet child I had cradled and sung lullabies to, was now the target of an ancient evil so profound it defied human comprehension. Something infinitely cunning and cruel had selected her, mere tender flesh and innocence, as the sacrificial lamb through which it would enter and inhabit our world wholly. But I was her mother. I would fight with my last breath to save my daughter from this fiend, to excise the parasitic darkness that clung to her soul. Lamashtu had not reckoned with a mother's love, nor the ferocity it could engender. I would find a way to cast the demon out and return my child to the light, or I would die trying. Of that vow, I was utterly certain. After Dr. Matthews first planted that sinister seed, the notion that my daughter could become host to the ancient evil Lamashtu, it sank its darkened roots deep into my mind. It quickly grew to consume my every waking thought and fevered dream. I became obsessed to the point of madness with saving my little girl from that fate worse than death. I dove headlong down the shadowed rabbit hole of arcane occult lore, ancient texts and rituals that had no place in the modern world. Every night, as the sun sank below the horizon, I sequestered myself in the dusty attic, hunched over crumbling tomes illuminated by flickering candlelight. These leather-bound volumes, lined with disturbing symbology, were acquired through Dr. Matthews' disreputable contacts, their pages brittle and covered in languages not spoken for millennia. My eyes strained in the dim light to decipher elaborate exorcism rites inked in Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, tongues I could barely grasp a whisper of. Meals and sleep became mere afterthoughts, my body sustained solely by my all-consuming, desperate purpose. When I eagerly presented these obscure rituals I had unearthed to Dr. Matthews, craving validation, his reaction gave me grave pause. He urged caution in slowly measured words. Many of these rites were unverified at best, outright fabricated over centuries of mythology and occultist foul play. Even those with authentic origins involved deep, unpredictable magic, prone to backfiring spectacularly. The good doctor advised we continue researching more carefully. Find another way. But I was already far beyond listening to reason's grounding voice. While Lamashtu's malevolent psychic grip on my daughter's fragile young mind tightened with each passing day, her humanity seemed to slip further away. She no longer spoke, not a word or even a whimper passed her lips. She would sit staring blankly at nothing for hours on end, ignorance and innocence lost, barely seeming to recognize my presence when I entered the room. Her once bright and inquisitive eyes were now empty pools, dull orbs, devoid of life or luminous spark. They chilled me to the very marrow in my bones. When the convulsion started, I knew we were truly out of time. Violent episodes would seize my daughter's small body at all hours of day and night without warning, leaving her trembling, foaming at the mouth, muscles twisted by unnatural contortions. Each time, it was as if a titanic battle were taking place within her for dominion and control. Afterwards, an inhuman, preternatural cunning and gleeful malice would fill her eyes, her gaze suddenly ancient and knowing far beyond her scant few years on this earth. There could be no more doubt. The entity was no longer merely attached. It had integrated itself and was clearly now in control. In desperation, I dove deeper into the Stygian shadows and hidden recesses of the occult underground, spending what little remained of our dwindling savings on ever more obscure and esoteric rituals. These were gleaned from encrypted dark web forums, their cryptic instructions penned in antiquated languages, which I struggled greatly to accurately translate. These were not the relatively tame religious rites favored by Dr. Matthews, but rituals drawn from the true old magics. Dangerous summonings and bindings designed to invoke elder gods and primordial forces from pagan eras predating humanity itself. These were powers far too chaotic and unwieldy for even most seasoned modern practicing occultists to meddle trifling with. But I no longer cared if an ancient ritual was safe or its specific origins wholly verified. All I cared about was that it could give me the power, the key to finally wrench my daughter's spirit free from the demon's insidious, parasitic grasp. And so I spent long, shadowed nights preparing, gathering the necessary ritual components no matter their moral cost or question of human origin. Pungent herbs gathered only beneath the light of a blood moon at their peak potency, gruesome talismans constructed from bones and leathered skin, thick candles rendered from purest human and animal fat, and arcane powders ground from exotic minerals harvested from only the most mystical and guarded places on this earth. I converted our backyard shed into a profane summoning chamber etched with esoteric binding circles, ancient wards of power, and runes based on cryptic illustrations from the antique texts. I took no chances. This unhallowed sanctum was meticulously designed to contain and focus raw energies never meant to be called forth from realms and dimensions far beyond mortal comprehension. All was ready. prepared with a desperate, obsessive passion for the fated night which drew inexorably nearer. The night lay shrouded in an oppressive darkness, as if the very heavens had conspired to extinguish the stars and moon from the sky. Thick, ominous clouds smothered the celestial tapestry, rendering it invisible to the world below. The wind, a frenzied tempest, lashed at the gnarled branches of the ancient trees, their twisted forms contorted as if reaching out with malevolent intent, their leafless limbs clawing at the void as if to warn me of the perilous path I was about to tread. But fear and doubt dared not grip me, not when the life of my beloved daughter hung precariously in the balance. The once blessed water, intended to cleanse our home of Lamashtu-a's vile presence, had failed us. Each protective ward, etched with desperate hope, had only served to further incite the wrath of the demon, unleashing a torrent of malevolence upon our lives. No, this was no time for feeble attempts at exorcism. Our salvation lay in the ancient magics, long forbidden and buried beneath layers of time and secrecy. It was a time when summoning the damned was not mere theory, but a dark art practiced by those desperate enough to defy the natural order. The barn, decrepit and forgotten, would become the crucible of our last, desperate stand against the forces that threatened to consume us. With every determined step toward that forsaken barn, I could feel the oppressive weight of centuries-old secrets pressing upon my soul. The wind, seemingly an embodiment of unseen malevolence, howled and taunted as if mocking my audacity. The gnarled trees, guardians of ancient knowledge, seemed to murmur in solemn disapproval, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows upon my path. Yet, in the face of such unearthly opposition, I pressed on, resolute and unwavering. For the sake of my daughter, I would unlock the forbidden rites of an age when darkness and chaos held sway. The barn, a forgotten temple of forgotten gods, beckoned with an ominous allure, promising the secrets of the past as well as the harrowing trials that lay ahead. Within the decrepit barn, I had meticulously prepared the ritual space, its eerie ambiance cocooning me in a sense of foreboding and anticipation. The symbols, ancient and arcane, adorned the earthen floor, their dark forms etched into existence with a macabre medium of ash and blood. I had devoted countless hours to the study of these enigmatic glyphs, committing their unsettling contours to memory before meticulously recreating them in the confines of this sinister chamber. As I gazed upon the symbols, they seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, defying comprehension with their otherworldly geometry. Circles within circles, a maddening array of jagged lines and shapes that defied the logic of mortal perception. Each stroke and curve conspired to warp reality itself. These esoteric sigils were more than mere markings. They were conduits, a means to focus energy, to tear asunder the veils separating our world from the abyssal realms beyond. The chamber was cast in an eerie half-light, the flickering candles casting grotesque, dancing shadows that writhed and contorted over the aged stone altar at its heart. The very air seemed charged with an unsettling tension, as if the barn itself were sentient, a witness to the unholy deeds unfolding within its crumbling walls. The altar, a cold and unyielding slab of stone, stood as a silent sentinel, bearing silent witness to the malevolent forces that had been beckoned into this accursed space. The centerpiece of this arcane sanctum was a statuette, an abhorrent work of artistry that bore the grotesque likeness of Lamashtu, a testament to the depths of both my obsession and fear. Crafting this idol had exacted a harrowing toll, consuming every ounce of my being as I delved into obscure descriptions and ancient artwork, painstakingly chiseling each horrifying detail. Lamashtu's eyes, elongated and bulbous, glimmered with an eerie, fiery light that seemed to pierce through the very soul. Her maw, a monstrous chasm, revealed meticulously carved fangs that appeared ready to tear through human flesh. In her posture, she assumed the stance of a predatory beast, crouched as if on the verge of an unholy pounce, her claws, meticulously crafted and menacingly extended, seemingly yearning to rend life asunder. As I gently placed the abomination upon the altar, I couldn't help but feel an unholy connection with this monstrous creation. Her empty stone eyes bore into the depths of my trembling, living flesh. With an air heavy with the weight of centuries, I began the incantation, invoking the name of Pazuzu, the keeper of the winds and a guardian against the horrors of Lamashtu. My voice, wavering at first, grew stronger, more desperate, as I beseeched the ancient deity to pierce the veil that separated our worlds. The incantations flowed from my lips like a river of forgotten tongues, their syllables strange and ancient. My hands trembled as I raised the ritual blade and drew it across my palm, a gory offering to the malevolent idol. The pain was familiar, a mere echo amidst the growing tempest of emotions that had consumed me. As I continued the ritual, a palpable chill settled within the chamber, the wind creeping through the age-worn cracks in the stone walls. The flames of the candles danced and flickered wildly, casting grotesque, writhing shadows upon the chamber's walls. The energy within the circle surged, causing the hairs on my arms to stand on end. With increasing urgency, I repeated the summoning, my voice growing hoarse, my desperation laid bare. The wind outside grew into a deafening roar, whipping my hair and clothes about in a frenzied dance. The words I spoke transformed into a desperate scream, echoing through the chamber without restraint. Thunder rumbled, shaking the very foundations of the structure, while jagged streaks of lightning illuminated the room through gaps in the old, rotting wooden walls. The symbols painted on the floor seemed to come alive, glowing with an otherworldly power. And then, as if the world held its breath, silence descended upon the chamber like a suffocating shroud. The storm stilled, the candles extinguishing one by one, plunging the chamber into an unfathomable darkness. It was in that moment, in the pitch-black void, that I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was no longer alone. The entity I had summoned from beyond the veil had answered my call. Amidst the abyss of that obsidian darkness, an oppressive shroud where even the very air seemed to constrict with primordial malevolence, a presence began to coalesce, an ancient sentience that existed long before mankind etched its first markings upon cave walls. It manifested from the shadows themselves, called forth by rituals never meant to be uttered by human tongues. This entity bore down upon my psyche with the weight of eons, pulsating waves of unfathomable power and knowledge that resonated behind my eyes like the pounding of war drums, echoes of an ageless dread. In the center of the profane summoning chamber, a vortex of energy swirled, warping the very fabric of reality itself. From within that vortex, where our fragile human realm intersected the fathomless beyond, a form took shape, amorphous and constantly shifting, blurring into madness should I focus upon it directly. Comprehending its appearance alone was enough to unstitch the fragile edges of my mortal mind. When it spoke, its voice reverberated as if from the bottom of a deep, lightless chasm. It scraped against my consciousness like rusted blades dragged across exposed nerves. As it spoke, I sensed this entity probing the furthest corners of my essence, sifting through my innermost fears and secrets. Its presence was a violation, like a pathogen seeping into every crevice of my being. My body convulsed, racked by forces that lay far beyond the physical. Only my consuming desperation to save my daughter anchored me against the madness threatening to unmoor my sanity. The entity surged forward, icy tendrils twisting around my mind, both toxic and intoxicating. It whispered, in 1,000 cursed voices from eons past, "O mortal vessel, you have only glimpsed the first faint glimmerings of true power. Allow me to show you more." What followed assaults my mind even now. The walls of the shed splintered away, revealing endless vistas of terrifying realities that surely no human was meant to witness. Lands where cyclopean structures clawed at a sky that bled and undulated like living flesh. Skies of endless depth littered with the titanic corpses of dead gods that drifted aimlessly through the ether. Horizons that curved back onto themselves, melting reality into a nightmarish mass. I heard the gibbering of the old ones, the maddened cackling of those who witnessed the true face of our universe and lost themselves. The entity reveled in my agony, feasting on the unmanning of my mortal perceptions as reality warped and broke before me. This was but a fraction of its dominion, it mused. The gulf of knowledge it had crossed in its eons of being. Just as my frail mind teetered on the precipice of the abyss, the visions ceased. But I was utterly shattered, my soul irrevocably scarred by glancing, for but a moment, upon true cosmic revelation. I crawled on bloodied limbs from that place which would haunt me until my dying days, knowing I now carried a stain on my spirit that could never be cleansed. The world I returned to was a lie, a fragile mirage, for I now understood the horrors that moved unseen in the limitless darkness beneath reality's mask. With trembling steps, I ventured back into the outside world, but I knew nothing would ever be the same, for I had glimpsed the endless and unfathomable terrors that lurked in the voids between the stars. The fragile walls of ignorance had come crumbling down, leaving me naked before the howling face of infinite, vast, cosmic madness.